Mr. Speaker, thank you. I would like to seek a point of clarification to Mr. Pritam Singh's speech earlier on. Now, in his speech, he said that asking the Ministry of Manpower to release statistics is like drawing blood from stone. Now, I want to highlight the point that on his question on the number of intra-corporate transferees, on the 6th of July, 2021, in a ministerial statement, I've already provided the numbers that there were 4,200 intra-corporate transferees working in Singapore the year before. That's 2020, a number that has remained consistently small. And of course, the rest of it is available in the Hansard. It's also available, published on the Straits Times as well. I think the point to highlight to everyone, every member of the House, and particularly in response to your statement, is that many of the questions that were asked, both by the Workers' Party as well as by the PSP, was not just on the numbers pertaining to intra-corporate transferees, but you've also put the questions together on the breakdown of whether the jobs went to Singapore citizens that were born in Singapore or that were naturalized Singaporeans, amongst other types of confidential information that was not readily released. Notwithstanding that, in the interest of addressing the issue in Parliament to the best extent that is possible, our manpower officials came up to put the statistics up required by members in Parliament. I hope that we can have this social compact, and let's make no mistake about it, that the vitriol and the raw emotions at that particular point in time, I hope was really something that we should all try to avoid. And I hope that they were not due to other factors outside of what the questions were intended to be. And I hope that they were not due to deliberate efforts to frustrate our social compact. To your point about the confidentiality, the confidential information that could have been released earlier, I believe that it cannot be the reason for the ugly xenophobia, the racial undertones surrounding Seeker. I think that's the point that I would like to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I go into the nub of the matter as raised by the Honourable Minister for Manpower, I think in terms of the xenophobic elements which the Minister raised, I think we are at Edom. We don't want our compact to be disrupted and overturned because of these reasons. So to that extent, I think we are on the same page. But let me just share with the Minister, when I refer to the intra-corporate transferees, Minister would recall in the debate that Minister refers to that the parliamentary questions were asked well before the answers that he gave in Parliament in July. Mr. Leon Pereira, if my memory serves me correctly, and I stand corrected, Mr. Speaker, I'm going based on memory alone, asked a question on the number of intra-corporate transferees in 2016. And the answer from the Ministry of Manpower, I beg your pardon, the answer in Parliament from the Minister of Manpower was, we don't reveal these numbers. And the point we were making was, and the point I made in my speech again today, was if those numbers were released, because the numbers were low, they could have punctured all that xenophobia quite early. And the point I'm making was, I could not understand why it is difficult to provide the information in 2016, but then when things are descending into an abyss, the numbers start coming out. Let me share I made this point earlier. I made this point in the course of the debate, and this was then Minister Ong Ye Kung's reply. the same point, I made the same point that there's no real difference in the point that I'm making. And this is what he said in my response to releasing information earlier. I take to heart what the leader of the opposition has said, that with information we can quell such falsehoods much earlier. We work in a bureaucracy. Some data is classified secret, confidential, and so on. So we are not at liberty to always disclose them. But what you say is true. Some information, it is better for it to come out early, and then we can move on. Especially, as you said, when it concerns issues like racism or xenophobia. It is much better to quell it early, unquote. So I hope that response addresses the point put to me by the Minister of Manpower. I am suggesting that in certain significant issues of great significance, the government is better off providing more information rather than less.
Mr. Tan Siew Leng.
First and foremost, given the low number of intra-corporate transferees, and as the leader of the opposition has persistently said that these are matters of national interest, it appears that in every single debate that we have, every single issue has now been put up as national interest. Now, I'm glad he acknowledges and he shares my point about having this common social compact. But I hope that in terms of perhaps prioritizing some of these questions and having a more precise and surgical, differentiated way of asking these questions could be one way of making it a lot easier. Thank you.
Minister Ong Ye Kung.
Wasn't intending to speak, but you mentioned my name a few times. What the leader of opposition said in his speech, I think it was a similar point that you made in the July 2021 debate, right? Which is that if only we released or if only MOM released the number early, you could have quelled all the xenophobia. I took that point. And my answer in July 2021, I think is the same answer today. We take to heart the feedback that you gave. If we had released, perhaps it would have quelled all the xenophobia and all the raw emotions. But as Minister Tan Siew Leng said, that data was graded confidential or maybe even secret, I'm not sure. But it was not ready for release. Because if you release intra-corporate transferee of a particular country, others may compare. It can have other ramifications. So it's not something that ministry officials will readily say, let's release it for Parliament. But situation became like that. Seeker became a big issue with a lot of raw emotions, got debated here. In the end, the ministers have a serious discussion and say, let's release it. And so we take your point, but it's not that straightforward a matter. But nevertheless, I think what Minister Tan Siew Leng is also trying to say is that after all this, let's not blame this whole debate and raw emotions around Seeker on MOM because they never released intra-corporate transferee data. It's not because of that. No? If we are honest with ourselves, it's not because of that. It could have quelled it. But I think many other factors took place resulting in those raw emotions, which is most unfortunate.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Mr. Speaker, I actually did not intend to bring up this point in the course of my speech today, but because Minister Ong mentioned yesterday, in the context of presenting alternative budgets, alternative agendas, just file a question. You'll get a written answer. I think that caused me to pause, because the answer that was given in 2016, and again I stand corrected if my memory fails me, was not that the reason we're not releasing the ICT data is because there could be commercial sensitivities and so forth. In fact, there was no reason at all given, if I'm not wrong. It was we don't release this figure, period. So again, I think the question really comes back down to thinking carefully about whether that information truly is going to be problematic and what is in our interest given Singapore's situation, given how some of these agreements can be problematic. And I have to add, again, I'm going back 6 years, so I remember the question of CECA didn't just drop from the sky. In 2015, 2016, 17, around that period, factually, the government website also had to come out and clarify some of these issues. So in that context, I'm not blaming MOM or pointing the finger at MOM, but making a larger meta point about how important it can be for information to be released and to take a different attitude towards it. That's all I'm making.